This is the Drips Sheriff, one of the oldest skins in Valorant's history. It's part of the Drips collection, alongside the Drips Operator and Bulldog. These skins were only in the game for a few days during a creator-exclusive alpha playtest that happened just before the closed beta launched. During the playtests, not many people used the Drips skins, as they were pretty ugly. It didn't help that the Ronin skins were on the same guns as the Drip skins, since Ronin looked a lot nicer. It was still nice to have some more variety in skins though, and I do like how the gold looks. However, once closed beta launched on April 8th, just a few days after the creator playtests, the Drip skins were nowhere to be found. It seemed like they had just vanished overnight, for seemingly no reason. Some people wondered why, but for the most part, people completely forgot about these skins. They were mentioned in a couple of random leaks and YouTube videos throughout 2020 and 2021, but that was it. Finally, after 2.5 years, the official Valorant Twitter account posted some neat info about some of the game's skins. They said that the Drip skins were originally supposed to look like godlike weaponry, but that they ended up looking horrendously ugly. So, the Drip skins got a complete overhaul, turning them into the Chronovoid skins we all know and love today. How they got from this to this, I'm not sure, but I'm glad we got some confirmation on what happened to the Drip skin line. I also want to mention the Toy or Arcade skins, another skin set that appeared in the creator playtest but didn't make it to the closed beta or full release. We don't know much about the Toy skin line, but I think it's safe to assume that it eventually got reworked into the Radiant Entertainment System skins that we have today. 7 months ago, after I made my first video, I started a series of short videos dedicated to things that no longer exist in Valorant, named Throwback Thursdays. It was released every other Thursday on my TikTok and through YouTube Shorts, and in my opinion, it did pretty well. However, it took a lot of time away from my main videos, and that's what I really want to focus on in the future. So this will be the end of Throwback Thursdays. This video is a compilation of all these shorts, in reverse chronological order because the early ones kinda sucked. With all of that said, thank you for your support, and enjoy. When Omen goes to place a smoke, he enters a phased world that helps him visualize its placement. But did you know that back in beta, this shadowy world didn't exist? All he had was a floating indicator that appeared in front of him, similar to what you see nowadays when you press R while smoking. This made it incredibly hard for him to place smokes accurately, especially when compared to Brimstone, who was the best controller by far in beta. Omen was generally very clunky and weird to play. His abilities were a lot slower than they are today, the controls for placing smokes were different, and his ultimate in particular was very weird. After the Gathering Shadow channel, there was a small window where Omen was reforming, granting him invulnerability as a chance to pull his gun out. This was pretty unfair and confusing, so the invulnerability period was removed in patch 0.49, as well as buffing the shade to make it harder to hear as compensation. In patch 1.0, the rest of Omen's oddities were corrected, including adding the phaser world to his smokes, adding the ability to cancel his ultimate, changing his paranoia to not immediately be cast, and making his smoke controls easier. I think we can all agree that Raze is one of the most annoying agents to play against, but sometimes having one on your team can be even worse.
What are you doing? Why did you do that?
Raze has the highest potential for team killing and sabotage out of any agent in the game, but did you know that it used to be even worse? When Valorant's beta launched, not only did Raze have 2 grenades, but her blast packs also dealt damage to teammates. People hated Raze in pretty much every way, so Riot decided to change her a little bit before people quit the game because of her. They removed one of her nades and increased the price of her satchel during beta, and cut the radius of her satchels in half in patch 1.0. Her ultimate got some well-deserved nerfs in patch 1.4 and 0.5, as well as a big nerf to the blast pack's damage. The biggest blast pack changes came in patch 1.8. An arming period was added to it, so now you have to wait half a second before popping the satchel if you wanted the full damage, as well as making the satchel explode when shot, and most importantly, no longer damage teammates. Raze has gotten a lot more changes since these, but most of them have been pretty small and have not changed her too much, with the exception of the Boombot nerfs. Poor thing. It's no secret that Sage was completely busted when Valorant came out, but the reasons why are a little less obvious. Yes, her heal was much better than it is today, and her resurrection could completely turn the tide of a round, but her real strength was her ability to stall. Her slow orbs and wall combined could completely ruin enemy pushes, and there wasn't really anything you could do about it. No other agent could compete with her ability to stall, not even Cypher, so it didn't take long for nerfs to arrive. The duration and effectiveness of her slow orbs was decreased in patch 0.50, as well as bumping up her wall's price. The health and duration of her wall was lowered in patch 1.0. You used to be able to cast her wall from super far away, but thankfully they lowered that range in patch 1.1. A fortify mechanic was added to the wall in patch 1.7, as well as reducing its price back to 300 and making her slow fields smaller. You used to be able to place your wall before the round started, but that was removed in patch 1.14. As a result of all these nerfs, Sage went from one of the most oppressive agents in the game to one of the worst by far, and she has only been nerfed more since then. When Valorant's beta launched back in 2020, Viper was easily the worst agent in the game. Her wall and orb were hard to place, her mollies felt pretty useless, and all of her smokes just got ignored. But slowly, buff by buff, Viper went from the worst agent in the game to an oppressive force that took over the meta. The radius of her snakebite was increased in patch 0.50, alongside a couple quality of life buffs. Her snakebite was changed to apply the vulnerable effect, and her wall was buffed to go through walls in patch 1.2. Yes, that's right, it used to not go through walls. Her ultimate, fuel, and toxins all got significant buffs in patch 1.4. Her wall and ultimate got some quality of life changes in patch 1.7, as well as changing all of her smokes to not decay teammates. Her molly, ultimate, and fuel system all got some decent buffs in patch 1.9. And in patch 2.6, Viper finally got the buffs she needed to push her into the meta. Her smokes were changed to apply an instant 50 decay to anyone walking through them. The equip time of her molly was lowered, and her wall and orb got a bunch of other changes. All of these changes came in less than a year of the game being out, and that's why Viper is the agent in Valorant that has been changed the most by far. Valorant has gone through a lot of changes throughout the years, but there's one thing that has seemingly always been the same, and that's the in-game economy. But did you know that all the way back in beta, the maximum amount of credits you could have at once was 12,000? This made it way too hard to come back from economic disadvantages, since the enemy team could pretty much keep buying forever once they won enough rounds in a row. So the max was reduced to its current 9,000 in patch 0.50. This patch also made it so armor would be carried over between rounds instead of being destroyed, which was a very welcome change. The last big change to the economy came a few months later in patch 1.11, reducing the amount of credits you get at the start of the round if you saved last round in order to make saving guns a less attractive option, alongside a few quality of life changes. Valorant's economy has remained the exact same for almost 3 years now, so I don't think it's going to see any more changes anytime soon. Out of all the maps in Valorant, Split is one of the oldest, and the one that has been changed the most by far. Its major renovations go all the way back to beta, and that's what I want to talk about today. Its first change was all the way back in patch 0.47, the first live patch in Valorant's history, simply moving one of the ultimate orbs from mid to B main. The purpose of this change was to shift some attention from mid to B main, which makes sense. Split got a couple more small changes in patch 0.50, messing with the pre-round barriers, and tweaking parts of B Heaven and B Site. The last change I want to mention was much more notable though, restructuring the choke point in mid to make it easier to push through. This change was one of the many things that made Sage such a dominant pick on Split, since her wall could cover the new area much more easily than a smoke or a molly. Split has gotten a lot of other changes since then, but I only wanted to talk about the early ones some people might not know about. Brimstone is one of the simplest agents in Valorant, but his Stim Beacon is one of the most unique abilities in the game. It's the only ability that allows you to buff your teammates, but did you know that it used to buff enemies too? This strange quality didn't last for long after launch though, as it was removed in patch 1.4 alongside a small visual change. The Stim Beacon needed much more help than that though. It felt pretty pointless to use with how small the buff was and how little impact it had, even after changing it to not buff enemies. The Stim Beacon was buffed a couple of times in the following patches, increasing the fire rate boost in patch 1.9 and changing the Stim to quick cast in patch 1.11. The biggest buff came in patch 4.4, adding a 15% speed boost on top of the existing fire rate buff, and this was the buff it needed. The community was loving running around at max speed with the new Brimstone, but just like with the Ares, the fun didn't last for long. The stim was nerfed in the immediate next patch, taking away one of the charges and doubling the price of the remaining charge, and it hasn't received any changes since. The Ares is one of the worst guns in Valorant, and it has been for a long time. It's outclassed by other weapons in its price range like the Spectre, Marshall, or Bulldog that are more versatile and better against rifles. But there was one very short period of time where the Ares was one of the best eco-weapons available. In patch 4.0, the Ares received two massive buffs. The spin-up was completely removed, and the firing rate was increased from 10 to 13. This might not sound like much now, but the Ares immediately shot up in popularity in both ranked and pro play. Everyone and their brother was buying this thing on anti-eco and light buy rounds. It was everywhere.
What is this gun? What the f is this?
The fun didn't last long though, as only 8 days after these buffs, the Ares was put back into the bronze jar in patch 4.1, making it more expensive and increasing the spread in recoil. The Ares gradually dropped back to its previous pick rate in pro play as a result of these nerfs, and it hasn't received any changes since. When Valorant launched back in 2020, there was only two Sentinels, Cypher and Sage, and they were easily the strongest agents in the game. Sage would receive countless nerfs to her wall and heal that eventually pushed her out of the meta, but Cypher was harder to balance, as he was the only agent that could cover flanks and truly lock down sites. This all changed when Killjoy was released, as she could do everything Cypher did and more. Nowadays, Killjoy is considered by many to be the best Sentinel in the game over Cypher, but there's one key difference between then and now. When Killjoy was released, there wasn't a range limit on her alarm bot and turret. Despite how crazy that sounds, Cypher remained the premier Sentinel on most maps, with Killjoy occasionally being picked over him or with him on Ascent. It's important to remember that people were still learning Killjoy, her full potential wasn't quite realized yet. Killjoy's abilities would receive some major changes in patch 1.11, adding range limits to her alarm bot and turret alongside some decent buffs as compensation. Most notably, the cooldown after picking up her abilities was reduced from 20 seconds to 7 seconds for the alarm bot and 10 seconds for the turret. The cooldowns were eventually reverted back to 20 seconds for both abilities in patch 3.0, and her kit has remained mostly the same since. When Valorant's closed beta launched in 2020, Cypher's kit was much different from how it is today, but there was one key mechanic that didn't make it out of beta. His cyber cages used to apply a short slow to anyone passing through them, similar to Harbor's wall now. This didn't last long though, as a slow was removed from the cages in patch 0.50. Despite this nerf, Cypher was actually one of the strongest agents in the early days of Valorant, since Killjoy wasn't in the game yet and his utility was hard to break through. Double Sentinel comps were very common early on, as Sage was also very strong at launch. The only other change Cypher's cages have gotten was the ability to pick them up during the buy phase in patch 1.4, as well as a ton of bug fixes throughout the past 3 years. The overtime system in competitive Valorant can create some of the most stressful situations imaginable, as both teams pull out all the stops to win just 2 rounds in a row. But this win by 2 format didn't always exist. When Valorant's competitive mode launched about a month after the game released, it used the same overtime system as in Rated, where it was only 1 round of sudden death called Endgame without any switching sides. This was changed in patch 1.3, only a couple of weeks after Ranked was added, where the new overtime system would be introduced. The new system used similar rules to the old one, giving players the same amount of credits and ult orbs as before, but now the teams would alternate between the attacking and defending side each round. The ability to draw games was also added as a part of this new system, and overtime has not been changed since. Haven is one of Valorant's most iconic maps, but it's actually gotten a few small changes over the years. In patch 0.49 during the beta, curtains would be added to the top of double doors in mid to stop sages from walling themselves up and peeking over the doors, and the color of Radiant crates would be changed on Haven and Bind. The biggest set of changes would come in patch 1.2, adding random objects to some of the map's corners in order to make clearing angles easier. Every map in the game at the time got some changes in this patch, but Haven has stayed the same since then, other than one small change to the boxes on C-Site to make it easier to plant in patch 3.6. Raze is a nightmare to deal with on tight maps like Bind or Fracture, but could you imagine if she had 2 grenades instead of 1? This was reality during the start of Valorant's beta, and it made her even more of a menace than she is today.
Enemy remaining.
Raze was easily the most hated agent at the time, so Riot would respond by nerfing her grenades into how they are today in patch 0.47. the first balance patch in Valorant's history. When Valorant launched almost 3 years ago, Omen looked much different from how he does today. The most notable difference between then and now is his eyes, but he was also a bit bulkier and less detailed. In patch 0.49, about half of the cast got an update to their models, and Omen's was definitely the most noticeable. Funnily enough, that's actually not what Omen looks like today, since a year ago in patch 4.10, Omen's model was upgraded again to make his armor and clothing more detailed. Shout out to this guy for telling me what this skin was. Go check him out in Kingdom Archives, they're pretty cool. I'm still working on the Viper video. I'm hoping to have it out before the end of the year. With all of that said, thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.